Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of True Story Live. Tonight we have my amazing wife, Jennifer, and the title of her story is A Journey into Oneself. So we're very excited, or I'm very excited. I know a lot of her story because I've been here for part of it, at least over the past several years, and obviously we talk, and she's told me a lot about it. But this is going to be a very interesting hearing for me. This is the first time I think that she has sat down to kind of tell this portion of the story. And so we're glad that you're here listening either in person or to the playback. And as usual, back in the day, we would say hello to everyone new that pops in the chat. Just please know that I do not want to interrupt any guest while they're in the middle of their story. So please don't be offended if we don't say hello to you right away. We will try to type in the chat to say hello. And then if there's a breaking point of some sort, definitely want to acknowledge that you're here. So just keep that in mind. Before we get started, also, tonight with us, we have our friend Christy, and she may or may not be on a mic, but she's here for support. And we also have Glenn with us, who may have some questions at some point. Again, we don't want to interrupt Jen when she's in the middle of telling a story, but she did say that she's open to people asking a few questions along the way. So we'll do that. Also, just as a reminder, we are still looking for people that want to come on the broadcast and tell their true story live. And it doesn't have to be, we've done a lot of deconstruction stories, which we are very interested in, but they don't have to be. Like we had Levi tell his story, and very much from the other aspect of not from deconstruction, of someone who is in Christianity. Still, and really enjoys being a part of that. And we were glad to have Levi on. So I guess the point is we're not restricting our stories to just deconstruction or anything like that. We are open to hear any kind of stories as long as they're true. So we'll get into it right away. So Jen, we usually start out with talking about the history. If you want to talk a little bit about where you were born and talk about your family a little bit and how you grew up and what that was like for you. And we'll start there and see where it goes.
All right, cool. I might be popping some cough drops during this because my throat's kind of not scratchy, but just feels a little rusty.
Well, I will. I will be too.
Okay, cool. All right. I was born in 1980. 80s baby in August, and I was born 2 months premature. Interesting story behind that. My mom was with her family going through an intervention for her father, my grandfather, at the time that she was pregnant with me. And I don't think she's ever said this, but I have a feeling that might have been why I came early. As we know, if a mother, when she's pregnant, is going through stressful things, it can definitely affect the child, and the child can feel it, and your body reacts to that kind of stuff. So she was having some very much physical reactions to the stress that was happening during that time of the intervention, because back then people didn't really talk about their family issues, very much swept under the rug or kept within a tight circle of the family. And so bringing a lot of things to light in regard to my grandfather's alcoholism was very, very stressful, not just for her, but for the other members of the family. And there was a lot of family members that wanted nothing to do with approaching my grandfather with his problems and trying to get some change happening so he could be healthier, and therefore the family getting healthier. So it was a rough time for them, and for my mom especially, because she's very sensitive too. So that happened. I was born after my two older brothers. One's 5 years older, one's 1 year older, and we lived in Louisiana at the time. Now, my mom grew up Catholic, but after I was born, or after my parents got married and I was born, I want to say they started attending a Baptist church think it was a Baptist. And I grew up in the Baptist church pretty much. So let's see, where do I go from here? Help me out here, Jason. You're like, already?
No,
I'll say,
I'm here to help. I'm here to help. You're doing great.
my dad was, I feel like the majority of what I can remember from my childhood, because there are a lot of blanks. I have a feeling a lot of the blanks from my childhood are due to just being so very anxious that I don't know if it was disassociated or just was daydreaming a lot to try to remove myself from what was happening. And even the fear of things happening.
Sure. And you have an amazing creative mind.
Yeah.
Great imagination.
I think it was very helpful in a way, survival wise. Sure. Not that I was in physical danger, but I just was very afraid. I was a very afraid kid.
Yeah.
And my parents believed in corporal punishment. And so, from my perspective and from what I can remember, I just remember being afraid of my dad, really afraid of his moods, afraid of making him angry or doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the state I lived in. And I know there were bright spots. I do have some memories of some fun things happening and good things happening, but it just always seemed to be overshadowed with this fear of my dad. And my mom, just, when you think back on your childhood and kind of look from a outside perspective of the dynamic of a family, I feel like my mother, I know she had some issues, obviously, with my dad reacting this way, but there wasn't really any change for a long time. So it just sort of was perpetuated. So went to church, grew up in Sunday school, and loved God. I know this isn't a deconstruction story, but it's definitely a part of my story.
Sure.
But I was afraid of death from a really young age. I would have nightmares, dying and waking up, just totally panicking. Sometimes I'd have a thought drop in my head, in the middle of the day at school. And think about dying and just have that jolt of adrenaline and fear.
Why do you think?
I think a big part of it had to do with the talks of hell.
Oh yeah.
But the unknown, not knowing like what happens when you die. And that was probably the biggest, actually, the unknown of it. Because even after I learned about heaven and I came to a belief in heaven, I still had this terrifying fear of death.
Yeah.
To the point where, like going to funerals really freaked me out. When I became an adult, I just wouldn't go. And I know that seems very insensitive.
No.
But I just was like, I
mean, some people don't like funerals. It's plain and simple. I mean, you want to be there to support people who lost someone, but funerals, you're not the only one. Funerals freak people out sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I had a pretty traumatic thing happen when I was little. To me, it was traumatic. And this carried out through my childhood, but with my dad and his way of disciplining, he would get very angry and red in the face and scary and yell. And then you'd have a person that you were already scared of spank you with a belt.
Yeah.
And I was sent to my room and I was just left. And I don't know if this very strong memory that I have is, I have a suspicion it was the first time it happened.
Yeah.
But it's so intricately burned into my brain where I just was in bed bawling my eyes out alone and even waiting for someone to come and talk to me. Yeah. And no one ever came. And I just cried for hours and I felt like my heart was breaking. Aww. And I remember having these thoughts of, why did I do that? I'm so stupid. Like, just repeating thoughts in my mind of how bad of a kid I was because my dad was so angry and it was my fault.
Yeah.
And then the the morning after, walking into the kitchen and just being really, waking up and remembering what happened, and walking into the kitchen and being afraid, almost like having this idea that it might continue, like it'll pick up where it left off, kind of a thing.
Sure.
And being timid and afraid, and just walking to the kitchen, and nobody really said anything.
Yeah.
No one really acknowledged what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was kind of just going along with whatever. And I realize now, looking back, that it made me feel invisible. It made me feel worthless. It just made me feel a lot of bad things. And then I started believing these things about myself, that I wasn't worth coming into the room and talking to me afterwards and explaining to me what happened. And now as an adult, I wish they would have come in, obviously, and talked to me about it and reminded me that I wasn't a bad kid. I just did a bad thing. And just reminded me of their love.
It would have been super important. So it sounds to me like you had no closure.
Yeah, I didn't. It was really left in the air.
Do you remember ever knowing what it was that they said you did wrong? Did you have any kind of awareness of that?
No, and I wasn't a bad kid. So, and from later times that my dad would blow up, I have a feeling maybe it had something to do with chores, or maybe not paying attention because I was a daydreamer.
Yeah.
Something along those lines.
Okay.
And a few years ago, I actually asked my mom, or I don't know if I asked her, but we had a conversation about this very thing. And she had told me, I tried to get your dad to go talk to you guys after you guys got punished. But then after I got off the phone with her, I was like, well, you didn't either. You didn't come to the room either. Like, where were you? Now, trying to have grace for her, and thinking about the volatile home that she grew up in, I'm sure that was difficult for her to grow up in a household where there was violence and screaming and drinking and, oh my gosh, so much stuff. Sure. That being married to someone who had these outbursts of anger probably triggered her own, childhood stuff. So, and then I don't know if this was exactly what happened, but, her not wanting to make it worse by telling him to come talk to us, or by, because when you grow up, when you're a Christian wife and you're trying to submit to your husband, I've heard of dynamics in families that if the wife tried to go behind and patch things up with the children, it could be seen as, what's the word I'm looking for? Going against the husband's wishes.
Right.
Like if my dad wanted to make a point to me as a child by doing what he did, she might have been looked at as subverting his parenting, you know what I mean? By coming in and doing something. So it just created a lot of, looped thoughts in my mind of who I felt I was, or who I believed I was, and just sort of perpetuated a family dynamic of, not only punishment and then the sweeping under the rug, no conversations afterward,
right?
But also me being very anxious and waiting for the next, not just the next time my dad was going to blow up, but the next time I might do something wrong or bad in his eyes that would cause him to erupt.
Yeah. I don't know if you see this already. I'm sure you do, but this is really a good way to set up what comes later. Similar dynamic of someone blowing up and you trying desperately not to
poke the bear,
so to speak.
Yeah.
And you said, before you continue, one more thing. So it wasn't just you; it was all the kids would get punished, and there was no closure. There was no, at the end, saying, "Okay, here's what you did. It's over. You've been punished. We can move on."
Yeah. And just the assurance of love. Because, when we're children, we need that.
Yeah.
I think when parents leave blanks there, I think it's human nature for children, especially, to fill in those blanks with negative things,
Well, it just occurred to me, Jen, that it's similar within Christianity. I
Yeah,
mean, we question ourselves, am I good enough? Did I ask for forgiveness in the right way? Or is hell coming to me? Because there's argument over, whether it's grace alone that saves you or whether you have to do enough works and where that line is. So I'd
exactly.
imagine that enters into it too. So it very much was an example
Mhm.
of what a lot of people go through with there not being any closure. And of course, we're told we're forgiven of our sins, but then people disagree on what that looks like and
Yeah,
when we know for sure that we're quote unquote saved. I mean,
yeah.
if
You're like
people,
left in the question.
right, exactly,
Yeah. And the interesting, I know my brothers were punished the same, but again, with all of these black holes in my childhood, things, time, I had very little memory.
yeah,
And so I don't have any memory, at least consciously, of them getting punished.
right,
But I don't have, if they hadn't been punished and I was the only one, I think there would be other symptoms of that.
sure,
So I know they were like later in life when we were preteens and stuff. I have some memories, but
yeah.
the younger years I don't. So where do I want to go now? I had a thought, and then you were sharing, and it flew out of my head. Let's see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I did. I did have a timeline of sorts. So one thing I did want to mention is that my parents didn't really emotionally bond with me. Like, I mean, maybe that's the wrong phraseology. There wasn't a whole lot of like talking about feelings,
Right.
talking about how to regulate feelings.
Hmm.
There wasn't a whole lot of sharing from my parents to us kids, which I get. I know there's mixed opinions about this, like how much should you share with your
Yeah.
kids that you're struggling? What will they understand? Is it going to cause more damage
Right.
if I share? Now, my mom the other day actually, I told her that I don't have any memories of her crying.
Yeah.
And she was kind of flabbergasted because she said I was crying all the time. I'm like, what? So maybe I blocked it out because it just was too upsetting. I don't know.
Yeah.
But later in life, looking back, I was just like, man, because from my perspective, with not having those memories, I thought it would have been great if I could have seen them get emotional, if they could have been vulnerable with me as a person, or even as obviously a parent, but a person in general,
Yeah.
to help kind of pattern just have these healthier patterns of how to not just regulate emotions, but how to express them.
Yeah.
So my dad's explosive anger was the majority of what I remember as emotions being expressed. And it got to the point where I didn't like anger. I thought it was ugly. I thought it was scary. And then you add the Christian upbringing to that. And from what I was taught in church, especially being a woman or a girl or female, whatever you want to call it, um, you think that you're told and taught that anger is like this bad thing, like it's sinful, it's ugly, and women shouldn't be getting angry. It was more acceptable with men. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Of course.
So from my perspective, I just thought, okay, my dad's allowed to get angry, but that's because he's a man, you
Yeah.
know.
Oh, yeah.
And not
Yeah.
to mention, you throw into it, I how do I say this? So I just felt very much that I wasn't allowed, or it wasn't okay, or both, that I wasn't allowed to express emotions.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the responses I got, I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. My
Yeah.
dad said that a lot.
Mm.
And as an adult, I look back and I think one of the messages that I garner from that I don't think I understood as a kid, but is that what I was crying about in the first place isn't worthy of even being expressed because it's stupid.
Yeah.
It minimizes my own experience and my feelings as a little person. And
Yeah.
so it just gave me the idea that what I was crying about didn't matter. And it was also a threat, so it scared
Yeah.
me. So it started making me believe that crying was wrong. It was bad. That
Yeah.
it wasn't accepted. There wasn't any open arms for me to run to
Oh,
find some some consoling, a refuge.
Yeah.
And I knew that parents, there's so many different ways we get it or see it or hear it from friends and TV. You get this idea of what families should be like, what parents should be like. And I just, I think even at a young age, I felt very hollow at knowing that I couldn't go to my dad for protection because in my mind, he was the one I needed protecting from.
Right.
And that just warped my little brain. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And the only thing I could come to a conclusion was it was me.
Yeah.
I wasn't worth protecting. I wasn't worth, this love that I so desired for my dad. And that was just very hard. That cognitive dissonance of having an idea in your mind of how it should be, and then it's not your experience, and you don't understand why, and you're trying to figure out why.
Would you say that this whole dynamic made you feel like you were alone?
Absolutely. I felt very alone. I felt emotions really deeply.
Yeah.
And I just didn't feel like I had anyone to confide in or talk to about it.
Right.
Because I couldn't even really express it. My dad grew up in a very tumultuous, home as well. His mom got polio when he and his 4 siblings were really young, and they thought she was going to die. So it was very scary. Yeah. And when she came back from the hospital, she was paralyzed. And I don't know if it was one parent or the other, or if it was both, but they had a very clean house. Everything was pristinely organized. It didn't really look like kids lived there. It just was very meticulous. That was the word I was looking for. And my parents haven't told me a whole lot about their childhood, but from the things I have learned, it seemed like emotions weren't accepted in his home either. And the kids had to kind of step up and help their dad when their mom got sick. So they kind of had to grow up really fast, but also the emotions in the house were regulated to a middle line. So it wasn't really acceptable for them to be loud, whether it was they were angry or upset, or if they were playing or happy. So it kind of had to stay at this middle of the road.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like a flat line.
Yeah. Which in turn he did to you kids.
Yeah. Maybe not as bad.
Right.
Not as extravagantly, but there was a point I brought that up, and I can't remember. Part of me wonders if my dad might have been sort of a geyser to where when it was suppressed so much when he was a kid, when he got married and had kids and was dealing with children and wasn't really taught how to deal with children on their level, he too fell into the patterning of his own family and felt like normal for him was baseline. But I also think that stuffing your emotions your entire life, especially in your childhood, I think we all experience to some degree an explosion of feelings at some point because it just gets so bottled up.
Sure.
So there was that.
Well, why should his kids get to express their feelings when he didn't?
That's a good point. That could be a perspective.
And
go ahead.
I wonder if it would make sense to tell the story about what happened in the hospital.
Oh, after surgery?
Yeah, after surgery and
because this actually plays into this. I didn't write this down in my timeline. So when I was, I want to say 6 or 7, we all moved to New Jersey, and we were there for about a year. And it was work that took us there, my dad's work. And I'm not sure how this happened, but me and my 2 older brothers all had hernias at the same time. And it was the type of hernia that comes up near your bikini line, like your groin almost. Yeah. It wasn't like the belly button, the one that's by the belly button. Some people get those. I don't know what the technical term is. But my mom was a nurse for her whole work career. And she decided to, instead of drawing out each of us having surgery at different times, she decided to have us all have surgery on the same day, which I think maybe she thought that was going to make things easier, but I don't think it did.
No.
um, so I have never felt as much pain as I did from that surgery. It was really difficult to walk and move around afterwards. But after the surgery, I remember I got a My Little Pony. My brother Dave got a Beach Boys cassette tape, one of their albums. I don't remember which one. And I want to say Mark got a Transformer. So I'm just throwing that in there for all of you 80s, 90s kids that loved those toys. But when I was still in the hospital bed and I came to after having, coming out of anesthesia, my grandmother came in the room and she was talking with me. And so she flew up from Louisiana to visit. And it was really scary. It was really scary being in a hospital. It was really scary having surgery. It was really scary being alone with nurses and doctors, and going under. It was just scary. So I was talking with my grandmother, and my mom came in the room, and when you're really emotionally raw and you're holding it in and you see a friend or a family member that you're really close to, and as soon as you see them, you just burst out crying.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like, I don't even know how to describe or explain, but I'm sure some of you guys understand. Yeah. So my mom came in the room and I just busted out crying and she left.
Yeah.
She just left the room. And that was just another happening that I took as a kid that meant my emotions aren't acceptable.
Yeah. I think that's so important to tell that.
Yeah. And my mom and I have talked about this, and she thought that she was making me cry, and that's why she left.
Yeah.
But from my perspective as a child, then I was so happy to see her. I was relieved, that kind of a thing. So emotions were it was really interesting in our family. It just seemed to be off limits and not safe. And it's very weird to try to explain to people. I was so observant as a child because it started with my dad. I was very meticulously observing his body language, his facial expressions, his tone of voice, because I was always trying to be prepared for when he got angry.
Yeah.
And not just when he did, but if he was not like, it wasn't a matter of if to me, from my perspective, it was when,
Sure.
And so I just was always trying to be prepared for it somehow in my little body. And so I just was really, really, really observant. There was a point, dagnabbit, that I was going to make.
It's okay. You're doing great. It'll come back to you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I just became very observant of people, and I lost it. It'll come back to me.
Yeah, it'll come back. One of the things I was going to mention with your mom, it's almost like she couldn't handle when you were crying because of what she had gone through as well. Neither of your parents, it seems like they couldn't handle
the big
emotions.
Yeah. So, with my father, I've always wanted to be close to him, both of my parents. I've always, even as a kid, had a desire to know them and hear stories, and they just seemed very standoffish. And I took it personally. I starting from that one time in my room crying and feeling like something was wrong with me, I started walking along my life, my timeline, or whatever you want to call it, collecting evidence to prove that false belief true.
Yeah.
So I just started taking things really personally.
Sure.
And I think sometimes things were personal and I think sometimes they weren't, but that's how I took it. And it just kind of added to the pile.
Sure.
There wasn't very much encouragement or support. I truly felt like the attention that I got, the majority of it was when I did something wrong. So that also kind of created a big fear behind making mistakes. Yeah. I was never taught that making mistakes or mishaps or whatever, they're all a part of learning. Like, you should embrace them. It's how you learn how not to do something,
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of the times my dad, would punish us was when we did make a mistake. Like, he'd pull us into the kitchen by our ear to show us how we had loaded the dishwasher wrong.
Yeah.
There were times where he would redo the chore I did and show me how to do it. He would do it over, because I did it wrong. I just had a big, big, big fear for a long time of making mistakes. And that was really unfortunate.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's see. I think my mom did struggle with codependency.
Yeah.
And, from her upbringing and then being married to my dad and how she maneuvered through that.
Yeah.
So later, when I got married the first time, I think the dynamic that I saw in our family really perpetuated and sort of prepped me to marry an abuser.
Yeah, it did.
I think I started somehow connecting love with things that aren't love.
Yeah.
Being neglected, being talked down to, being criticized, being yelled at,
Yeah.
made to feel stupid. It was like more of the same, and it was more similar in the beginning of the marriage, and it grew over time, as many abusive relationships that happens.
Yeah.
But one thing I was going to go back to with childhood before I get into that part of my story.
Sure.
Through this family dynamic, I sort of learned somehow to become a chameleon.
Yeah.
I felt like if I can make everybody happy, no one will be upset with me and I won't get into trouble and I won't get punished. So there's perfectionism that came into it. There was never feeling like I could say no. I really felt like I desperately needed to be a yes person.
Yeah.
Hop to it when something's asked of me. And some of that's couched within Christianity as being, and maybe not even just religion, but in general, being respecting your elders, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I just was never taken by the hand and guided to explore who I was at the time and who I wanted to be. I was trying to piece things together from what I was seeing to figure out how to do this thing.
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't have anybody to lean on for support, which is also very scary as a kid,
Jen, it's interesting you say that, because Glenn just put in the chat two things. I'll just start with the first one. Glenn says, so Jen, at the time you most needed support, you did not get it. That does your head in to think that someone thinks they made you cry, sort of insensitive to the situation. That's the first one. You want to comment on
that? I think he's spot on.
Yeah.
I also wasn't taught how to say no. I wasn't taught how to set boundaries. I wasn't taught about bodily autonomy. There was just a lot of things. And to be fair, I don't think my parents were taught these things either.
No.
I really don't. And so it wasn't so much as I'm going to withhold these lessons from my children. I just don't think they knew how. And I'm not trying to, excuse it, but I am, from my perspective, trying to understand where they're coming from too.
No, absolutely. I think it's clear they didn't know how to handle it. Emotions, teaching you how to set boundaries. I don't think you mentioned your mom being codependent. I don't think she had a lot of boundaries for herself. I mean, she wanted to be a dutiful wife, and that took backseat to being a dutiful mother. That's just my opinion, but
yeah,
I'm not saying.
And my mom shared with me that my dad was kind of jealous of the time she spent with us and the attention she gave us.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, that's really tough. And on one hand, again, I can put myself in my dad's shoes and understand. I'm sure that's hard for any, husband.
Sure.
The dynamic of a husband and wife changes drastically when you enter kids into the mix. You have to share.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he was tired of sharing growing up with 5 siblings. Oh my gosh.
So he grew up having to share and possibly being somewhat ignored and having a baseline. And I'm not making excuses for him either. I'm just saying that I do understand, based on what you've said, I can get an idea of some of the whys. It doesn't excuse it
Yes.
at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it gives you a different perspective and some understanding. I had one before I go into the marriage. I had one instance with my dad. I want to say I was 12, and I don't remember what set him off, but I was in the dining room, and I can't even remember who was in the room with us. He was so angry at me. He put his hands around my neck and slammed me against the wall, and it terrified me. He had spanked us. He had knocked us on the heads with his fist. He had pulled us into rooms with ears, but it had never been like that. And the next thing I remember in my conscious memory is my mom got me into the car, her car, and I'm bawling my eyes out. And my dad comes out of the front door, and he's walking toward the cars. And my mom is telling me to lock the door. And it was those older cars where you had to push the locks down to lock them. It wasn't automatic. It was manual. And I was frozen and I couldn't move. And I just kept saying, I can't. And what I do remember what was going through my mind at the time, I was so afraid of hurting his feelings.
Oh.
I was afraid that if he saw me reach over and lock the door, that he was going to think I was afraid of him.
Well,
and that I didn't love him. Oh, I was, but obviously I was, but I was more concerned about him and his feelings than I was my own safety. And my mom reached over and locked the door, and my dad got in the other car and just peeled out of the driveway and left. Now, I don't remember there ever being a discussion after this.
Wow.
I think it was the same as before, where things were just sort of swept under the rug and we just moved on like nothing had happened.
Yeah.
And that was really damaging too, because all of these lies I had been telling myself from that first time when I was around 4, I think, it was like more proof added onto the pile.
Yeah.
That I didn't matter, that I wasn't loved, that something was deeply, deeply wrong with me.
Oh. Yeah.
And it was just hard. It was really, really hard.
Yeah, I know.
So in middle school and high school, I was perfecting my chameleon skills.
Sure.
And another thing I want to mention, and I don't know if anybody that's listening has felt like this, but I really have this perspective of I wanted so badly to be chosen by someone or by people.
Yeah.
It never occurred to me, for example, that I get to choose my friends. It was almost like people came along, and if they, presented some interest in being friends, I was elated. I was like, I didn't like, hey, let's put you through an interviewing process first, or even, I am making a joke, but, or even thinking, do I want to be friends with them?
Right.
It was just this immediate, yes, we're going to be friends. I'm not saying that's terribly a bad thing, but from that perspective, I just really wanted to be chosen.
Yeah.
And because of that position I had taken and that belief I had or something, I had some very toxic friends.
You sure did.
That were very abusive, in different ways. And then so that perpetuated this message I was getting that something's wrong with me, that I deserve to be treated like this.
Yeah.
Quick story. Go ahead.
Oh, just real quick. We've talked before about how narcissists and toxic people, it's almost like they have a sixth sense about people that they know they can take advantage of and abuse. That's all. Go ahead.
I think, I started to think that maybe they do have a sixth sense. I think sometimes they test people. They'll do little things to see how you react or respond. And if you just lay down and take it, then they do a little more. And so it kind of goes into that direction.
Yeah.
But when I was 13, I was in middle school, and one of my toxic friends and she was my best friend at the time.
Sure.
We had a house at the front of our neighborhood that wasn't part of our neighborhood, but it was at the front of it. There was some fields, and they had a horse named Sunday. And when before the parents got divorced, we used to go there and we used to ride Sunday and play with the daughters that had lived there. But the parents got divorced. The mother and the kids, the daughters, moved out, and the father was still living there, and he still had the horse. but they weren't taking care of the stable. This poor horse was just living in mud and crap. And there was like no grass left at all in this fenced-in area.
Oh my gosh.
It was really bad. So my friend and I went to go bring her carrots. Now, my parents somehow knew that it was only the father living there, so they weren't comfortable with us going to the house anymore. So we were technically disobeying by going to see the horse. But we felt so bad that she didn't have any grass. So we went out there to give her some carrots and apples or something, and she wasn't in her pen. And so we found her in the field next door to her pen in the house. There was like tons of grass over there. And I guess she jumped the fence and she was over there. So we tried pulling her back, to get her back in her pen. She wouldn't budge. She was like, nope, I'm happy here. So we went to the house to knock on the door to see if we could get the saddle to put it on her and ride her back to the pen.
Yeah.
And there was a gentleman who was very, very much mentally ill that answered the door and was talking in a way that wasn't making sense, which should have been scary and should have made us turn tail and just leave. Yeah. But we thought it was, and I hate to admit this, but we thought it was kind of funny at the time. It was a little bit scary, but also kind of humorous. Yeah. I had never been exposed to somebody in that particular place mentally.
Sure.
So we had ended up getting through to him that we wanted the saddle, and somehow, I think it was on the porch, and we ended up getting it, taking it next door, putting it on the horse. And we decided to ride her around a little bit before we brought her back.
Yeah.
And it was a cinch saddle, which I grew up with a Western saddle that's got the buckle. And my friend didn't know how to really put this particular, it's like a bunch of ropes that are like a strap. And then there's another bunch of ropes that have a metal ring.
Yeah.
But it's like we didn't know what the crap we were doing. And so we kind of knotted it together somehow. And the other thing that neither of us knew, because we weren't professional riders, we hadn't been professionally trained or anything. We didn't know that horses stick their stomachs out when you tack them up. And you're supposed to, there's a couple things you can do, but sometimes if you walk them around, they suck it back in and then you tighten the saddle. Didn't know that. So on my second ride, the saddle flipped underneath the horse's belly and I fell off. Yeah. And in falling slow-mo, which is what I remembered, I tried to catch myself, and she was I don't remember how many hands she was, but she was pretty tall. I landed on my arm and it snapped my arm backward. So it hyperextended, dislocated, and shattered my elbow. Wow. So all of this story is to tell you about another friend of mine. Her name was Sarah. She was in my class, and we were really good friends, or so I thought. And I was wearing her turtleneck and sweatshirt, and they were two pieces of clothing that her mother had given her, and her parents were divorced. So these were special pieces that she had let me borrow. So when we had walked back to the house and the EMT was called, ambulance, they showed up and they had to cut the sweatshirt and the turtleneck off of my arm to get to it to see what was going on. Yeah. And I was bawling the whole time. And it wasn't because of the accident. It was because of the sweatshirt and the turtleneck being destroyed. And I was so afraid of what my friend was going to think. And so, the whole rigmarole, riding the ambulance to Richmond and having to have surgery and realizing at age 13, I am not a superhero. Like, I do break. Yeah. So it's kind of a good lesson to learn, but sure. When you're a kid, you're like, I'm invincible. That was shattered.
That one early. Yeah.
Yeah. So the surgery, again, very scary.
Yeah.
I think my parents were very scared too. Just not fun. But I had all these friends visiting and calling, and friends from church, from youth group and stuff, coming and visiting. And because Richmond's an hour away from where I lived. And I didn't hear a peep from my friend Sarah.
Yeah.
And it just made me very uneasy. And I didn't know what was going on. And then I just thought she was mad at me. I grew up just thinking everyone's mad at me.
Yeah. Right.
So when I got back home, I had to have physical therapy for a year. And then I had to go back into surgery to get all the hardware taken out of my arm. And there's a lot of details in that, but I'm not going to go into that. I found out from another girl that was kind of a mean girl. And she was friends with my friend Sarah, and she she had let me know that she was pissed off that I had ruined her sweatshirt and her turtleneck. And she was like, if you can't pay her back, she doesn't want to be friends with you anymore.
Oh, geez.
And I was crushed. And I remember my mom taking me to the store, and I bought her these really cute, like white cutoff jean shorts, and ended up giving to her through this other friend. And I never heard from her again. So it was just another situation that had happened where I was getting these messages like, I'm just not worth anything. You know,
Yeah.
a sweatshirt and a turtleneck are worth more than myself.
Yeah.
It just was rough. It was really rough.
That's a big message. It's a big message,
Yeah,
especially
big
as a
message.
younger person to
Yeah.
to think that's the way that it works. That
Yeah.
someone lets you borrow their shirt, and then you fall off a horse and crush your arm, and then need to have surgery, and they're concerned about the clothing.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I get it. I get the message that would give a person that.
So it's not good. I had a handful of friendships like this throughout my younger life, and it just was very unfortunate. So fast forward to meeting my ex-husband. I had truly become a Christian in 2020. Was it September 11th? Was that 2020 or 2021?
2001, I believe.
Okay, so it was 2020 when I came to Jesus, and that's a pretty cool story in and of itself. I had a very spiritual experience under the stars one night, and it was pretty incredible. I will say, though, that one of the things that pushed me toward that particular direction was fear, which is unfortunate. I don't think our Creator wants us to come to Him through fear. I really don't. And unfortunately, that's rampant.
I would agree.
So, and I had dated some guys. I had a true love, first love, whatever you want to call it, in high school, who broke my heart. And all these relationships had sort of the same underlying theme, where I just was so desperate to be loved, to be seen, to be heard. I accepted things that I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
You know, I just didn't know any better, and I didn't know my worth, you know?
Yeah.
And I did things that I shouldn't have been doing, like having sex.
Sure.
I think the whole idea of girls having daddy issues and then being promiscuous. I wasn't promiscuous in the sense that I was like sleeping with everyone,
right?
But they were in what I thought were committed relationships.
Yeah,
I was like, okay. And from my knowledge, I was never cheated on per se, but I just was seeking for a lot of things. I was seeking for validation.
Yeah.
Glenn's buzzword.
Yeah.
I was so badly wanted to be loved, wanted to be seen, wanted to be heard. And I didn't know who I was, because I had just gotten so used to being a chameleon, being who everyone around me needed me to be for them.
Yeah.
I thought that's how you got love, because that was sort of my experience, and which is just very unfortunate.
You're saying,
when go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. Go ahead. Finish your
sentence. No, you go. You're good.
You're saying that your idea of love was being who the person needed. Is that?
Yes, or the mechanism. Well, not a mechanism that makes it sound really cold. I thought in order to be loved, you had to extend yourself and be who the other person needed you to be.
Yeah.
And I don't think I could have articulated that back then.
Sure.
I don't think I was that aware.
Right.
I think a lot of this was, programming and subconscious thinking.
Yeah.
It was what I understood because of the upbringing and just what I saw around me, the people that were around me. So I met my husband through a mutual friend, and they were dating, and they had dated for 2 months. And I think now, looking back, I think he thought I was an easier mark for what he needed than my friend. And I won't go into this would take forever to go into all the details, but they ended up breaking up. We ended up dating. We dated for 6 months, and I've heard this particular kind of story over and over again. What ended up happening was he mirrored me. He mirrored my likes. He mirrored my dislikes. All these things that, because he when he came to me and we started talking and getting to know each other, because I was in this place of wanting so badly to be heard, to be seen, to be known, on a deep level, he just really seemed interested in me and just everything that made up me. So then as I'm divulging all of this information about myself, he's mirroring me back. He's, I don't know if some of them were made up stories, and I don't know I know you, Jason, know what mirroring is, but
Sure.
when someone hears somebody say, oh, I like this or whatever, and you say, oh, me too,
Yeah.
So in this process, I wasn't necessarily getting to know him and all his background. It was more of, this is who I am as Jenny, and he's saying, this is how I am too.
Yeah, that's me. That's me.
It's me. It's me. So I thought I had met my soulmate, and he was a Christian. He grew up in church, and it's so strange to me, at least my experience with Christianity. It was almost like it was drilled into me. You need to marry a Christian guy. You need to marry a Christian guy. You need to marry a Christian guy. So a Christian guy or a guy comes along and he says, I'm Christian. You're like, right on, let's go.
Let's go. Let's do this thing.
Because part of what I thought I was supposed to do, and I was so big on doing what other people thought I should do with my life, or, in general, was to marry a Christian man and become a submissive wife and a mother. So in my mind at the time, that was like the pinnacle of the goals of my life.
That was it.
Yeah. I was like, I get those things and I've arrived.
You've arrived.
Oh my goodness. I was also in a place of under the assumption that other people make you whole.
Oh.
So these things that I lacked, these things that I hated about myself, I really and truly believed hook, line, and sinker that marriage was going to fix that. Like finding the guy God has for me is going to fix these parts of me that I don't like, these parts of me that other people are either saying directly that I'm deficient in, or the way they're responding to me or treating me is showing me that I'm deficient in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure it does.
Yeah. So I just went in like full bore, and we got engaged 6 months after dating, and then we got married 6 months later. And there was only I want to say 2 times while we were dating and engaged that should have been a red flag for me, that this is not the person for me. But I had over spiritualized so much within this relationship. There were things that had happened, even like the what I thought were synchronicities, these things that we had in common. Yeah. In my mind and heart, I was like, oh my gosh, this is God, and
sure. That's what we
continue.
Do.
Oh man.
That's what we do, is over spiritualize.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I didn't know that there are specific conversations you should have with someone you're dating to figure out if you have the same morals, the same core values, the same, just trying to find out if you really and truly are going to mesh. And another thing I learned growing up was opposites attract. So in the beginning, when the shit started to hit the fan, that was part of the kind of I keep saying programming. I don't know what other word to use.
No, it's okay. Program's a good word for it.
It's like this idea of opposites attract. You're like, oh, it's going to work better because we're so different. Yeah. Now, granted, I think people that are very different can make it work, but
sure,
part of the reason it works is because of those core values that align, where these other outside things can be different, and it's fine.
Yeah.
I feel like I may have gotten duped, because after we'd gotten married, he really flipped a switch.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things that gradually changed, and there was some things that changed right after we got married. But he was a very, very angry person, and it was hard for me not to feel like I was reverting back to being a 5-year-old, because I was being triggered. he's having these huge rage outbursts, and I'm like a kid again, wanting to like hide in the closet, you know?
Yeah.
And I definitely tried to, with what I knew at the time, tried to be like, okay, let's sit down and like talk through this. You know, we're adults, we're married, like we're adults, right?
Yeah. Perfectly.
Sit down and talk through it. And I even at the time had the understanding of how communicating could go.
Yeah.
It wasn't so much me trying to do what my parents did. I had somewhat of knowledge to be like, okay, like this is where we sit down and I tell you how you flying off the handle and breaking things and throwing things and having road rage, how it makes me feel, and that I don't feel safe. And you're my husband. And so you're supposed to care about that. And because you care and you love me, you'll adjust. And that was not what happened at all.
No.
Anytime I tried to talk about my feelings or share, it was deemed as nagging, which I think is just, I don't know. I've heard a lot of stories with Christian marriages where even if a wife, the first time she brings up something, she's labeled nagging, and it's a tactic to get you to shut up.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it at all, like at all.
No.
So over the years, I just came to be very quiet, and I sort of caved into myself because it just wasn't safe. It wasn't safe to be myself. It wasn't safe to cry. There was not one time in 14 years that he consoled me or came and held me or told me it was going to be okay. My tears or emotions just made him irate, like super, super angry. So it was kind of like a continuation of childhood where I just was getting that same message over and over again. It was really rough. I'm not sure where to go from here.
It probably validated for you, or what's a better word than validated? It proved the point that what you had learned in childhood was correct. I mean, all those things that you mentioned, you were getting messages from your parents that your emotions, there wasn't a safe place for your emotions. Your emotions didn't matter. You were bad. Obviously, why is this person getting so angry at you all the time? Was there anything in his mind that you could do right?
Not that I knew of.
Not that you knew of. So it's confirming was the word I was trying to think of. It was confirming for you that the messages you were getting when you were a child were accurate.
Yeah.
Made it seem like that those things were right. Those things that you were thinking when you were a kid were correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the other things I wanted to share, since this is my story and I can share whatever the hell I want.
You sure can. You sure can.
There was some sexual
things have changed. Things have changed. Yeah.
There was some sexual abuse happening in this marriage, and it started out where when we were engaged, he had told me that there was two things he wanted to tell me. And looking back on this now, I think this too was a test by a manipulator. That's just my opinion. Yeah. He had shared with me when he was younger, he publicly exposed himself to a woman in a parking lot, and he got caught and was arrested. That should have been a huge red flag. And the other thing he had mentioned to me is that when he was even younger, I think he was a preteen, he had an older girl cousin that would sneak into him and his mom's house. And this is after his dad passed away. His dad passed away when he was 12 of a brain tumor. So this was soon after. She would break into their home, or sneak in. I won't say break in. She snuck in. And he said that she would dress him up in girls' clothes and do stuff to him.
Yeah.
Now, I was so horrified when he told me this, but not in the way I should have been, maybe. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I could tell he was very embarrassed to share. At least he was acting embarrassed, like very timid to share this stuff with me.
Yeah.
Especially we weren't married and we were engaged, and maybe there was some fear that I would call off the engagement. And at the time, I was so in this position of feeling so responsible of making other people more comfortable.
Yeah.
or saving them, rescuing them, all of these different things in my personality at the time. And then you add this, being desperate, period, desperate to be loved, desperate to be heard, desperate to be married, desperate for this to be the guy that God has for me, all of these things.
Yeah.
And also I'm a kind person. I'm not a jerk. So I felt like the godly thing to do at the time was to listen, to not judge him. And by not running the other direction, showing him love. Now, I do think that is a way we can show love to people. But at the time, I didn't realize that these things that he was telling me about were going to play out in the marriage.
Right. Of course.
So in the beginning, he had shared with me that he liked wearing pantyhose and he liked the feel of them. Mm-hmm. And I was a little like, huh? But I wasn't a cold fish either, like a prude. And I was always told, the marriage bed is undefiled. Yep. So anything that's within the marriage bed, that it should be fine.
Sure.
But over the years, things started to gradually get worse. It turned into him wearing panties, wanting me to put makeup on him, nail polish, humiliating him in public.
Yeah.
Doing things in the bedroom that I was not comfortable with. And I'll back up a little bit. After we got married, when it was just the pantyhose on the timeline of things, I gathered the courage to try to talk to him about the kind of things I liked in the bedroom. Yeah. This is what married people do. They have conversations about this stuff.
Right.
But it did take me a lot of courage, because the boyfriends I had been with before, I didn't have a whole lot of sexual education from my parents, a lot of talks, just the mechanics of things.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That was about it. Yeah. And then what was I saying? I didn't have a lot of talks with my parents regarding sex. And then the other relationships I'd had, the couple I'd had before I got married, were with guys that didn't really know anything about women's bodies, but I think they were also under this teaching or understanding that sex is for the guy. Sex is for the guy. Yeah. It's not this, it wasn't ever taught to me that it was this mutual thing. Now I knew enough to know that it should be, and then I was thinking, oh, maybe it's just like Christian marriages. I don't know, where it's supposed to be this beautiful thing. So I had enough knowledge to know that obviously women can orgasm, and that it should be a mutual sharing and exploring each other. Right. So when I brought up this conversation with him, he told me, I will never have sex that way. That is so boring. And then he called me vanilla.
Yeah.
Now, the person I am now, I was like, dude, I'd be out of there, completely out. See ya.
Howdy
5,000. Yeah. Yeah. But I, again, took it as my wants are wrong.
Yeah. Something's wrong with you.
Something's wrong with me. Yeah. And so I just sort of shut down and I shut up and I became a sex object. And that's not good. And that's not godly. And I mean, some people might think that's godly.
No.
So as things carried on, and as some of you may know, when someone has a proclivity toward, I don't want to say twisted, because I don't want to judge people that do things like that. That, you know what I mean? Yeah, I do think his proclivities were born out of being abused. I didn't see it as abuse back then because I didn't know a lot about that. I looked at it as what a lot of people look at it from, as, oh, this young boy got lucky, like,
oh, wow. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just, oh goodness. So as time went on, things got more and more twisted, and I even think from the beginning, it was more about him and his pleasure than it ever had anything to do with me. And the times that I would try to talk to him about it, he would assure me that the reason he enjoyed himself was because he was doing it with me. Right. But that wasn't the case. No. I think he just was placating me. So the reason I bring all this up, one, is to share, but also I think 3 years into the marriage, I had approached my mom. And, this is why I like the idea of being direct, because I went into this talk with my mom wanting something specific, and I was sort of fishing.
Sure.
Because I was a Christian woman, a wife, and she was a Christian woman and wife, and she was my mom. And I really wanted someone to tell me that I could leave.
Yeah.
And, or someone to tell me that I was worth more than being used the way I was being used. And I felt forced. I truly believed, because I was taught that I was not allowed to say no.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter what was happening. I had to say yes. And it is a horrifying thing to be a person, a human being, where you're feeling coerced to say yes to things. And in your mind, you are screaming, no.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. So I went to talk to my mom, and it was very, very hard, because I was very embarrassed to share with her like what was happening, in our marriage and in the bedroom.
Yeah, of course.
And because we had never been super open about sex in general, it was very uncomfortable. And she told me she was sorry. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was in line with, praying more,
Yeah.
and reading scripture,
Yeah.
and, just in that line.
Yeah.
And I just was devastated. I just expected a completely different response from her.
Yeah.
And then I ended up talking to my parents' pastor at their church, and that was very, very, very difficult, because he's a man. And I got the same kind of response. So I just had nobody around me telling me, look, you are a beautiful being, and you deserve to be loved and cherished and protected. And you deserve to be with someone where, when you tell them you're uncomfortable with a situation or uncomfortable doing something, that person that claims to love you and is vowed to love you and protect you, for them to say, okay, we don't have to do this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to do this if it is making you this uncomfortable and this upset, and making you feel used.
Right.
So that was really rough.
Yeah.
And at some point in the marriage, the intimacy like dried up. I think he could tell that I was not okay. And I don't think it dried up because he didn't want to hurt me. I think, there started to become some porn use. And I think it just became easier for him to turn to porn instead of turning to me.
Yeah.
And there was a part of me that was very relieved, also horrified, because I didn't want him looking at porn. He was my husband. I wanted to be intimate with him. I wanted to connect with him.
Of course.
But I also didn't want to do these things that he was saying that he needed in order to get off.
Right.
And I think like 5 years, 3, 4 or 5 years into the marriage, I told him that I had never orgasmed with him. And he seemed like he just didn't care.
Well,
he wasn't angry. He wasn't upset. It was just like, he didn't care at all. And I was like, oh, okay. Alrighty then, what do we do? I don't know. So then it was, a sexless marriage for a really long time. And that made it even more lonely, because I had sort of convinced myself that anytime we had been intimate, that was connecting, like intimately connecting for us on an emotional level. But I was being used. And so even this, in my mind, I had created it to be intimacy, but it really wasn't. I don't even think I ever really had anybody explain to me what intimacy was. At the time, I thought it was just, intercourse. But intimacy is so many different things. And all the other ways that you can be intimate with a partner, I didn't have any of those with him. It was just the act of sex, and that's not good.
No.
So, good.
Just real quick, Jen. So again, it's this message that there's something wrong with you. He gave you these expectations. He called you vanilla. He had these, in my opinion, I'm not, being critical of people that enjoy doing this in a relationship where the other person wants to, but in this relationship, you didn't want to. And he, in my opinion, made you feel like there was something wrong with you. That's the message. And
Yes. And
then
I took it
stopped.
on. I
Yeah.
believed it. I was like, I
Yeah.
guess wanting romance and passion in the bedroom is wrong.
Right. And
Yeah.
then later when he stopped wanting sex as much, then that further
Solidified
solidified that there's something wrong with you. You're not
yeah.
attractive. I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's what it seems like to me, that
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
were
I'm
a
not
lot of,
desirable and
right.
I'm not loved for me. It's got to be all these twisted things. And,
Right.
you know,
Then of course the
that
porn
was,
thing.
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. That's very damaging. I was just going to add that as soon as we got married, there was a few weird things that happened where he was like wanting me to dye my hair blonde, which I ended up doing, which did not go over well. Fried my hair.
I want to see a picture of that, by the way.
There are no pictures, thank God.
No pictures of you, blonde hair. Okay.
But there was always comments of, it was like he was trying to change me after we got married. He was just trying to change the way I looked and the way I dressed and all these different things. So again, like you had just said, it was all these things playing into this overall message of, people aren't accepting me for me.
Right.
But who is me? So I wanted to scooch on to, I don't even know where to go from here, because I do want to get to like the current where things are now, but I don't want to go too fast or too slow.
Okay. No, you're fine. You're fine. We're fine as far as time goes. We have, if we're going to stick close to the 2-hour mark, you've got 50 minutes left. So there's plenty of time. So if I could help with this part just a little bit about the timing of things. So you went through this, and then do you want to talk a little bit more about the daily abuses that you went through, or is that?
Yeah, actually that segues into a note I made.
Okay.
So like with my dad, but times a million, I was on edge all the time, anxious all the time, having panic attacks, having nocturnal panic attacks, different pains in my body. Like I felt like I was falling apart because I just was so very hypervigilant to his moods, to the point where before I left, if he sighed, my body inside would just freak out.
Yeah.
It was like someone had set off a volcano of adrenaline and heart racing and hot flashes and diarrhea and, migraines.
Yeah.
I mean, it just was like insane. And over the years, it started, his meltdowns started happening more frequently. Like in the beginning, it was very infrequent. I mean, when it happened, it was just jarring and upsetting and horrifying for me and just terrifying. But as the years went by, it started happening more and more. And I do remember one time I went to my mom and I said, around other people, he's fine.
Yeah.
Like he's happy, he's smiling, he's normal. And when we get behind closed doors, it's just like this monster comes out. And she had told me that it was because he felt safe with me.
Oh.
And I get where she's coming from.
Sure.
But this was not good because I stayed longer because I like morphed this idea into, oh, wow, he's abusing me because he feels so safe with me. My gosh.
That turns my stomach a little bit there.
Mine too. I didn't recognize at the time, and I know my mom didn't either, that abusers, they make choices. If they're freaking out 1 minute and throwing stuff and breaking things, and then as soon as somebody else walks in the door, if they have an audience that's not the person they're abusing, they snap to it, and all of a sudden they're like Mr. Perfect. They're making a conscious choice. I didn't understand. Whoops. I was so confused.
On that one point, Jen, you have shared before, like, okay, so you hadn't mentioned that you guys eventually got an antique store together. And then, you guys would be having a fight and it would be time to open, or there'd be nobody in the store and he'd be yelling at you. And then a customer would come in and he was all Mr. Smiley.
Yeah.
That's crazy making.
Yeah. And that also was very damaging too, because the message I was getting was that, and I would ask him sometimes, why is it that you save the best parts of yourself for other people? Like, why I don't know. I didn't understand. And I just was getting the message that other people were worth his happy side or his good side or his calm side, but I wasn't.
Right.
And then it kept perpetuating this idea that it's me.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yep.
And he just, I just kept trying to change. I kept shaving off parts of myself that made him angry or upset him or frustrated him or irritated him. I was becoming nothing. I was being erased, and I was erasing myself.
Yeah.
I didn't, I felt like the only way to make this marriage work, and, God hates divorce, so I can't leave.
Yeah. There's
So I don't have any other choice but to erase every part of myself that is driving him crazy and is making him so angry, which is making both of our lives miserable. I just didn't think I had a choice but to do that. And I just was becoming smaller and smaller and quieter till I felt like a shell of myself.
Yeah.
I didn't know who I was anymore. And he still didn't like me. Like near the end, I thought, I really feel like he wants a robot. He wants someone that has no friends, no family, no emotion, no feelings, no periods, don't get injured, doesn't get sick. I mean, like the list, because I was like tallying this list our whole marriage of things that pissed him off to make sure I didn't do any of them, or try not to. And it was insane. There's no way someone, a healthy human functioning person could do that without completely losing their mind.
Right.
I mean,
well, you've heard me say many times that for someone that has gone through, and there's not time for you to share every single story of every day of abuse that you endured.
Yeah.
But, and I have heard a lot of the stories, and I have said to you before, the fact that you're not totally insane or a basket case, or even more than that, let's say that you're not a basket case and you're not insane, which is the truth, but the fact that you're able to carry on a healthy relationship with any other person after having gone through this, that you're able to trust anyone, that you're able to know what a healthy relationship looks like, even though you had no model for that ever, is a complete and total miracle. And it says a lot about who you are as a person. You're very resilient, and he couldn't crush you. Yes, you're having to deal with the effects of his abuse and the things that he did and all of that, but he was not able to crush the spirit that you have inside you.
There are times I wish I would have lost my mind, because then certain people around me would have believed me or been interested in what I had gone through.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Hey, I don't know if you and Glenn can hold down the fort real quick. Can I run to the bathroom?
Well, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you guys, you don't mind?
No, I don't mind at all.
Okay. I'll be right back.
Okay. Just let me know when you're back. Okay. So I'll fill in some of the about the antique store. So her ex had initially had a home remodeling service, and she helped him with that business, and things weren't going very well in the marriage and all the things that she described. And she had realized that they weren't really getting along. They were fighting a lot. And so she thought, well, maybe if I got a job somewhere else and we had some time apart, that would be a good thing. So she had tried to get him to, I hate to use this word, but let her get a job separate from working with his business. And he just refused. He had all these reasons why. He says, well, you won't make enough money. I need help with the business. And then, I'm going to be doing everything by myself, et cetera, et cetera. So she was not able to even work somewhere else. And then so with the remodeling business, did that for a while, and then started the antiques store. And then so it was not just the at-home stuff with the abuse and his raging, his anger fits and all of that, but it was literally all the time, during the day, at work together, and then going home together, and then having that continue at home. So especially early on, there really wasn't any escape. from it, just completely ongoing. And then she may mention this, but in the last few years, she had gotten to the point where she would just tell him, I'm going for a drive. And she had different places that she would go where she could just get a break, just get away for a while. Of course, he didn't like that and would call her and sometimes show up. And sometimes she would go to her parents' house. It seemed at least a place of refuge for a short time, and he would show up. And it's like she couldn't get away no matter what she tried to do. And that was just ongoing. And I mean, like I said, there's not time for her to tell every single story and every aspect of what this was like. And part of explaining some of the things that she's described is to get to the point where she is now, which is, in my opinion, very much worth it. Worth everything that she had to go through to get here. It just blows my mind that anybody can go through what she went through and still have a head on her shoulders, and more than that, without any kind of model of a healthy relationship for her to be a partner in the way that she is to me, and having not had it modeled for her. Now, I know her. She talked about her parents a little bit, and they're really wonderful people. They're not like horrible. I don't think she gave that impression or anything like that. They're like a lot of people from that generation. There's like about the expressing your feelings and sharing that. A lot of that's generational. It's not an excuse, of course. A lot of that is generational. I mean, they grew up with parents that were part of the Depression, that era. And because of the way those people grew up, I mean, you were struggling so much all the time. Everything was about survival. So they grew up in a survival situation. Your feelings didn't matter. Your feelings were not important. So when they raised kids, that's kind of what they got. Feelings don't enter into it. You got to do this, this, and this to get by, and that's pretty much it. So again, that's not an excuse. It's just I do understand the idea of, and it's not all boomers, but my parents had similar things, probably not as bad as Jen, but it's this idea of feelings not being as important. Are you back?
Yes. Sorry
All
about
right.
that, guys.
No, that's
You know,
okay.
when you hold it so long and you think it's going to come out quick and it decides to take its time.
That's okay.
Ugh.
All I did, Jen, was I shared a little bit about the business with remodeling and getting the antique store, and that you tried to get a
Cool.
job somewhere else because you felt like you were arguing all the time. So you thought you having a job somewhere else might help with that, and that you really didn't have much refuge at all.
No, I didn't. And one thing I was going to add to that I was thinking of when I ran to the restroom, growing up within a childhood where emotions just seem not okay to express, and then being married to someone who was so free with sharing his emotions, but was so upset with me sharing mine.
Yeah.
It just was a continuation of that message that specifically me showing emotions was not acceptable.
Yeah.
There were many times he told me that my emotions were inconvenient.
Yeah.
And the times that I did cry around him, because I learned very quickly that I shouldn't, it would make things worse. And I was always trying not to make things worse.
Yeah.
He would glare at me from across the room and tell me that I was being manipulative like his mom. And it just was such an angry response to big emotions in me and genuine emotions that I was feeling.
Sure.
It just perpetuated the message that I felt that I was getting as a child, which almost reiterated the message. You know what I mean? It was like, see, it's not just your parents that can't handle your emotions or your brothers.
Yeah.
It's this guy too.
Yeah.
So it also, I got really good at being stoic. Like it started in childhood. I learned very quickly to, on the outside, to portray this little person that I got better as an adult, but I started to learn how to be stoic. Like, even if there was some crazy shit happening inside of me emotionally,
Yeah.
that I needed to look like I was okay in order to
Yeah.
continue to be loved, continue to be accepted, continue to be included. It just was that running message,
Yeah. I've seen
So that
it.
was tough. Yeah, you have. It's gotten
Fortunately,
better.
it's gotten way better, and I haven't seen it that much, but I've seen it
Yeah.
enough to understand what that looks like. It's like an sort of an emotionless robot. It's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
Yep.
but anyway.
Yeah. After having to strip parts of my personality and stuff off, shut those things off or stuff them deep down inside in order to survive. I definitely struggled with that in the beginning, but you're right. It has gotten so much better.
Oh my gosh.
It's been 6 years since I fled, since I got free. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit because the marriage and meeting you is a whole other story.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't want us here for hours unless you'll let me. No,
perfect. So you have, just to give you an idea, you have 35 minutes. So I think this is
okay, cool.
time to switch gears and how you left and what led up to that, and you're good at that part of the story because it's
absolutely
super exciting.
Meeting you and Glenn was a huge, huge turning point in my life story. I felt like I had met two people that were just as open as me and just as much enjoyed the deeper parts of humanity, of what makes us human beings, what makes us tick, the things we struggle with, the world, life, spirituality, all of these different, it's almost like any topic wasn't off limits with the two of you.
That's true.
And I've never met up until that point, I had never met anybody like you guys. And I was telling Christy the other day that I felt like I was just in this really dark place, like I had people all around me, but it just felt so lonely because anytime I tried just a little bit to venture out to test someone to see if they thought some of the things I thought, or if they'd want to go down a rabbit hole of conversation about a specific topic, it just seemed like people thought I was weird. Like, why would you want to talk about that? Or why do you even think, like, what?
Yeah.
I just felt so out of it. Like, I just don't fit in anywhere. And when I met you and Glenn, I felt like I just fit in. And it was a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
You did.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. It was wonderful. And then meeting the two of you sort of had a lot of weird, not repercussions. That's not the right word. It really helped shift my perspective and the lens I was seeing things through. Like, Glenn was the one that helped me realize that within the abusive marriage I was in, I had a choice to leave. I thought I needed my ex's permission to leave.
Yeah.
That's how brainwashed I was. I was like, he's not going to let me leave. Like, what the hell? I could leave if I damn well please. Part of that was Christianity and God, and being taught God hates divorce. But it had gotten so bad that I truly was like, I am going to die if I stay. And there's a lot of backstory to me coming to these realizations, but Glenn especially helped by just asking me questions and getting me to think. Because I didn't even realize that I was participating in the dance of the abuse by what I was accepting, what I was how I was deciding to handle it, which wasn't really handling it all, really. It was like I didn't know that I had a choice to participate.
Right.
And so recognizing that I did, it allowed me to have the choice to leave.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
And we had started doing this radio show and just having some community outside of this isolated bubble that I was in with my ex was really, really helpful. But it also started shining lights on dysfunction in my life and in my family.
Sure.
I had really and truly up to that point concocted this fantasy of the family I had. And so, thanks a lot, guys. When that bubble was burst, I was like, what is happening? Now, this is actually a very good thing. It was hard at first because it's almost like I had to look at and see the humanity of my parents and
Yeah.
my brothers, and they weren't these perfect mom and dad or perfect brothers that I had concocted in my head, or the only thing that I was allowing myself to see.
Right.
So I kind of had to come face to face with some of the dysfunction in my own family and in my childhood. And like, not now, I did go through my time of blaming. Okay, I did. But I do believe that this process was a way to step out of it and to get some healing.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know there's a problem, you don't see the problem, how are you going to fix it? And not
Right.
only that, I think it sort of put me in a position where I was having a relationship with these people that wasn't really real.
Yeah.
I don't know if that sounds right. It's just so weird.
Well, it was
So
an
it did.
illusion. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
just real quick. So saying it wasn't real, maybe that's not exact, but there was an illusion of a relationship that you wanted it to be, and you kind of allowed yourself to believe that's what it was until I think
Yes.
when you said meeting Glenn and myself shined a light on the reality.
Yeah.
The two people
Not
that are
just myself, but the people around me.
right. So, Glenn and I are not perfect by any stretch, but we are trying to be healthy, and you can talk to us about anything, any subject, and that was definitely not what your family was like. So in comparison, you were able to see, hey, wait a minute, maybe some of the stuff that I'm experiencing isn't the way it's supposed to be, or at least it isn't the way it has to be.
Yes. Beautifully put. Beautifully
Okay.
put. So I was very shocked with how my parents reacted to me leaving my ex. And one of the biggest hurts was that they just didn't seem to be interested in what I had just gotten out of. And
Right.
I think I had assumed that they were going to be the place I could go to just unload
Yeah.
everything that had been happening finally, and have a safe place to curl up in. I needed a refuge, and I just felt like, again, my parents were in a refuge. Now, they did tell me years later, that they didn't want to pry, and I get that, like, as a parent, and especially with your adult child. But this all comes down to expectations and assuming, and it's a mess because, I'd like to think that if I came to them and said, hey, look, I am really not okay, and a lot has happened that you don't know about, and I would like to share it with you. Can I share it with you? I think I want to believe they would have said yes.
Yeah.
But I was always feeling like a bother to where I wanted people to come to me and ask.
Yeah.
And I think that's somewhat a normal human want, you
Sure.
know?
Sure.
But within relationship, it does go both ways, and people can't read minds, But there was a lot of dynamics. I moved back in with my parents, and so I was 38 at the time. And I was physically, mentally, spiritually, psychologically exhausted. And because they didn't know what I had just stepped out of, they had their own expectations of what I was going to do with my life now.
Yeah.
And they wanted me to go right into getting a full-time job. I hadn't really slept, like really, really had a good night's sleep. And I don't even know how long, because I was sleeping next to someone I was terrified of.
Yeah.
And if you've ever had that happen, if you've ever done that, you're not actually sleeping. Like,
No.
I didn't dream for years because I don't think I was getting into deep sleep, because I think
Right.
my body knew I wasn't safe. My
Yeah.
nervous system knew I wasn't safe. So it was keeping me from going into a dead sleep, because it was afraid, because there was times he would wake me up and be like over me and standing over me in bed, yelling at me. And I didn't know what I had done. I'm like groggy, half asleep, just being berated. And it was always circular arguing that I would genuinely apologize, and he would keep coming back to what I did. And I
Yeah.
didn't know what he wanted. I'm like, and he didn't believe me. I would apologize and he would not believe me. So he would just keep going it over for hours, guys, hours. So I was so
Yeah.
tired. I just
Yeah.
needed to rest. And it's like my parents didn't understand. And I mean, in a sense, how could they if they didn't sit down with me and didn't know all the details of the years of hell that I had been living in. So that was really heartbreaking for me because I really wanted my mom and dad.
Yeah.
And they just weren't there. I was under the same roof as them and they weren't there. And it just it was like what I experienced with churches, being in a room full of hundreds of people and you're here worshiping God and I have nobody to talk to about what's happening.
Right.
Because anytime I tried, people looked at me like I had 5 heads and just looked at me like I was weird. And I just was alone in a crowd full of people. It's the loneliest feeling.
Yeah, it is.
It's not good. So where do I want to go from here? I know for a fact now in looking at my parents, I have wanted them to love me in the ways I've wanted them to love me.
Sure.
And I just recently came to this realization that, especially coming into my own and discovering who I am as a person and diving deep into all of that, instead of focusing all my energy in life on being who everybody else needs me to be, like, who do I want to be?
Right.
And realizing that that's not a sin. It's not wrong to know yourself. It's not wrong to learn how to love yourself, to learn that you're worthy of good things and worthy of being protected and worthy of being cherished and loved and listened to and understood. It's such an amazing place to come to. And so I think as I've been on that journey, I've gotten, in the past, I was getting a little more frustrated because I just was frustrated with my parents for a long time. And I saw a video a few months ago that just blew my mind. It was talking about people's autonomy and how when we have expectations of others that doesn't align with who they are and where they're at in their own journey of life, that it's not allowing them their autonomy.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can get manipulative, sometimes, and you don't know it. It's like you're not doing it on purpose. But I had to come to realize I'm wanting my parents to be me.
Yeah.
And that's not possible. It was a huge one.
Yeah. That particular realization was a pivotal point in your recovery.
Huge. I was like, oh my gosh. And being on the road of reparenting, I just realized I am the perfect parent for me because I've walked through everything I have gone through and I understand it on a level nobody else can.
Right.
And so I vote me.
Yeah.
So I've learned how to be here for myself in ways that I never knew were even possible. And it's so beautiful. Mm-hmm. And it's also helped me with my feelings and resentment toward my parents because I've been able to see them in a different light and to understand as best as I can that they're their own separate individual people. Yeah. They've had their own experiences of childhood with their family and their dynamics, and they have a whole world within themselves of experience and everything they've gone through that has shaped them too,
Sure.
And even though they're my parents, I also don't want to make people be something they're not. Now, I've also learned how to make room and have space for the parts of me that grieve the parents that younger version of me, especially the child version of me, needed, that didn't get. And to recognize that it wasn't personal.
Yeah.
It was just my parents dealing with the things they were dealing with and not knowing how to meet me where I was at, and me not even knowing. Like, I didn't know enough back then when I was a kid to be able to actually articulate, hey, mom and dad, I need more hugs and more cuddles and more, I want some alone time with dad so he and I can connect just one-on-one. And, I need my mom more. And, I need to feel safe sharing my feelings and for you to comfort me instead of spanking me for trying to show them. Like, I didn't know how to word all this stuff. Yeah. So, a lot of it's forgiveness, a lot of it's self-acceptance and self-love and self-discovery, and recognizing that we are separate, all separate individuals with our own life experiences that have shaped us. And to be able to give grace, to be able to have radical acceptance and just love people where they're at has been so huge. Because part of wanting other people to be what you need them to be, it's not really fair. It's not realistic. It's not really loving, you know,
Yeah.
but finding the balance between the hurt, that you have, but also acceptance and understanding. It's really beautiful. The other thing I wanted to mention is I finally hit this place where I can look at everything I've gone through, especially the marriage, because that was like the darkest time. And to finally be grateful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a masochist. I'm not like, hey, bring on some more abuse. I want to grow more, um, but to see and to realize that I am the person that I am today, the person that I'm learning how to love
Yeah.
and delight in because of those things I went through. And I do believe that they happened for me. And I might not all understand all the reasons as to why it's happening for me. I get bits and pieces every day, these puzzle pieces clicking together, reminding me that, if it weren't for this, this, and this, you wouldn't be at this place that you are, learning and understanding the things that you understand. And you wouldn't be able to have the compassion for certain groups of people or certain individuals if you hadn't gone through that.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing and beautiful,
Yeah.
hard, but worth it. And I think learning to love myself, even in the smallest way, has helped me continue on the healing journey of digging into myself and digging into my past and trauma and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Because if I continued to hate myself, I wouldn't have done it.
Right.
I wouldn't feel like I was worth doing the work,
Yeah. What would you say was the change there? Do you know at what point it was that you felt like you realized that you were worth it? I mean, and what does that mechanism or what does that journey look like for you?
Part of it was meeting you and Glenn. I just, I felt appreciated. I felt like the things that I was saying and sharing were worthwhile when I hadn't really had anybody come along that made me feel that way. Now, that's still external though. You know what I mean? But I will say that the friendship that I've had with Glenn and with you, and the friendship I had with you that blossomed into a relationship, and then dating you, being engaged and being married to you specifically, has helped teach me how to love myself because of how you have loved me.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to make this weird. I'm not saying you're like a parental figure. That would be super weird. But I think that kind of mechanism is what should happen in childhood. That a parent loving the children in a very healthy way helps a child learn how to love themselves. So I had never had that in my life to help model that for me. So being in a relationship with you and even a friendship with Glenn has taught me a lot about loving myself.
Yeah.
I think we all deserve to have those people in our lives that truly see us and delight in us and accept us where we're at.
That's it.
To help us on that journey of turning inward and realizing, okay, because that's been the hardest thing. Forgiving myself for, supposedly getting into an abusive marriage, because there are parts of me that are resentful that I didn't see the red flags and that I continue to stay, and, all those different things.
Sure.
So I had to forgive myself and really, truly say to my younger selves, you didn't know what you didn't know.
Right.
Just like my parents didn't know what they didn't know and may not still know, with some things. But we are all on these individual journeys. And then, what was the question you asked? Because there was something else I was going to say.
I asked what was the point of your journey, because you had mentioned that.
With self-love? Did it have to do with self-love?
Yeah, that you were worth all these things. You were worth caring for yourself.
And then I was saying it was the friendships with you guys. That's been the biggest catalyst, to be honest. And then doing trauma therapy and getting into IFS, which that particular modality teaches you that you do have internal parts of you that are born out of trauma or wounding. And so the process of walking through that with my therapist and then at home by myself or with you, it helped me see the younger parts of myself and have compassion for them. Whereas before, it was like I just hated these parts of me.
Yeah.
Like the whole stoicism that I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
with having all of these emotions, which are energy and chemicals in your body happening, and you don't feel like you can express any of them. And you're holding it in. You're trying, on top of that, you're expending energy to look like you're okay on the outside for years on end. It's a lot of pent up stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I started dealing with the jaw pain that happened, like it started happening really bad in like 2010.
Yeah.
I think it was just my body's way of trying to tell me that it was tired of holding all of this shit in, like let it out, you know? But I still have a part of me inside that feels like that's necessary. And I think that's why I still have the jaw stuff pop up every once in a while, because there's still that, that younger part of me that's like, oh my God, don't show your feelings. Like act like you're okay, put on a smiley face, you know, do the dance. And then there's my true self, you know, my higher self or true self or whatever you want to call it, is like, no, we're not doing that anymore. But that part's still like, but come on, you know,
Yeah.
come on.
Come on.
Yep. So, but it's getting less and less. Do you guys have any questions?
Yes. Glenn, if you have some questions you want to ask Jen, I will say this, Glenn, when I asked the question, you know, how this happened, you know, like when you found out that you are worthy of better things, he put in the chat, we kept plugging the same messages on TSL for years. And that may have been a part of it too, because you were continuing to do these broadcasts and we were talking about all this stuff. We were talking about narcissism. We were talking about healthy self-esteem. We were talking about, you know, learning how to love ourselves, and just over and over again, all these wonderful subjects. And so that, I'm sure, played a part as well.
Yes, because Glenn, you and Glenn both know, but Glenn especially knows the merry-go-round I kept getting on. And I could talk about that real quick. This past summer, what happened?
Sure.
So I kept labeling it ADHD, and maybe that played a part in it. But my mind was just so out of whack. I would latch on to things like whether it was perceived slights or things that I might have done that upset someone, because I sensed someone was upset just in general and I assumed it was me. And then I was trying to be a detective to figure out what it is I did or said or wrote or text or whatever. Like my brain was going crazy, and I would just get on this merry-go-round that would just spin out of control, and I didn't know how to stop it. And not only that, I didn't think I could. Right. And growing up in the church and hearing the one scripture, taking every thought captive, I knew the scripture, I knew that, but I didn't know how. No one ever explained to me, how do you take your thoughts captive? Like, what are the mechanisms of that? Like, how do you do it? Yeah. And so because no one ever explained it, I just thought, my logical brain went straight to prayer. Like, okay, prayer is the answer for everything. Yeah. I'm just going to pray, and that would help a little bit. But then the cycle kept happening. Yeah. And so this past summer, I was sharing with Glenn again, and hopefully that makes him laugh, because I'm sure he got so tired of me getting on the merry-go-round.
I think he did. And on my end too, it was frustrating for me, because I was here during all of this, and I could see that you were making progress, but I'm sure all the way over in Australia, it just seemed like to him that you were just kept repeating the same.
Why are you getting on this ride again, Jen? He couldn't understand why I kept doing it.
Right. But to me, it wasn't the same exact merry-go-round. Okay.
It was slightly different. Had a couple different horses. Maybe a lion.
Each time you weren't there as long as the last time too.
Yeah.
It was like you would get off quicker. But anyway.
But this last spring, you know, I left a job, and then I got another job, and that was like not the job for me. And then I had to leave it. which was a big deal for me because I was so used to sticking things out and making it work, even if it was putting me through hell, because that's exactly what I did with my marriage of 13 years, sticking to it, suffering for suffering's sake to prove some point or to prove that I could. And who am I proving this to? Like, and I made the decision to step down from the job because my brain just doesn't work in the way that someone in that position needs it to work. Mm-hmm. And I was finally understanding that I'm not broken. Now, all of this came about because when my brain was spitting up so much and I was talking to Glenn, he introduced me to mindfulness.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what that was. And it blew my mind because no one ever told me that we can actually choose what we focus on. We don't have to go along with every thought or thinking that happens inside of our brain. Like you don't have to do that. And there is something to meditation and calming yourself and getting quiet and breathing, focusing on breathing. Obviously, breathing is really important, for our bodies, but I think there are some spiritual aspects to it. I've experienced it. And it sent me on this road of learning how to become more mindful of my thoughts, which then are connected to your emotions. And that's part of the merry-go-round. That's what kicks it off. You have a thought, then it turns into thinking. And then for me, I would start obsessing and ruminating, and it would just get faster and faster and faster. And it just would not stop to where I'm not present in the present moment because I'm in my head and I'm just flying around like a mad person. Yeah. And I always thought I had to ride out that wave until it dissipated and stopped on its own. I didn't know that you can actually choose to let the feelings run through you, observe them, and make space for them, but not let it take over your entire body and completely wreck you. Like I never knew there was a choice. I was like, there's a choice? Like what? So I spent the whole summer when I was applying for hundreds of jobs, maybe not hundreds, but a lot of jobs, trying to find a job, just really working on this part, working on changing my subconscious programming, which we all have, from our upbringing. There's so many things that play into how our brains work because we get on autopilot.
Yeah.
And it was a tug of war for a while because I had parts of my brain that wanted to continue working the way it had been because it was familiar. There was some safety in it because it was so familiar. And I knew every edge and every part of that particular way of thinking, and I had to break out of that and do something new. And it's an art form. I truly believe it is an art form. Any art form takes practice. And so I just continue to practice, and I have so much peace in my mind. Like I think about where I'm at now, and it's not perfect. I'm still learning every day, different things and different ways to make it better. I can't think of a better word than better. To be more calm in my mind. But it was so worth it. And so along this line of mindfulness, also looking inward and healing the parts of me inside, that then kicked off this healthy self-love that I think we all should have, and that I think our Creator wants us to have. Love thy neighbor as yourself.
Yep.
That it's just blossomed into this beautiful thing. And I think the more you learn to love yourself, love who you were created to be, and your quirks and your differences and your flaws and the mistakes you've made and the successes you've had and all of these different things, all of these things that culminate to who you are as an individual. I think it's easier to, what was the point I was going to make? It's easier to, there was something about the mindfulness. I just lost it. It was going to be good, I swear.
I bet it was. I bet it was going to be good.
Well, I will say the more mindful I got, the more I realized how I was talking to myself. Because that's one of the things that's really insidious. It's huge. Sort of like this thing that plays in the background, and you're so used to it, you don't notice it.
Right.
And so once I started becoming mindful of my thoughts, then I was like, holy crap, like I am talking to myself so terribly. No wonder I have no self-esteem. No wonder I don't have any confidence. No wonder I don't trust myself. I don't trust my intuition, which I think is the Holy Spirit for some people. Yeah. So so in that process of mindfulness and recognizing so many things, the self-love was able to be birthed, I think.
Yeah.
It just goes so together, those two things,
Yeah.
I think.
So where are you now, Jen, with all of that? What's your day to day look like, and how do you see yourself now as opposed to the rest of your life?
Oh, that's a great question. I see myself as a person in the world that is on her own journey of discovery, of life, of creation, of God, of spiritual things, of other people. Um, I don't know. How do you encapsulate that in words?
I think you're
I
doing good.
just, I just am so much more of a peaceful person. I'm sure I looked peaceful sometimes, but gosh, inside my body and my head, I was really not okay for a very,
Yeah.
very long time.
Sure.
And when you talk about energy, I think a lot of people could sense it.
Yeah.
And I do think it played a part in attracting people that weren't healthy for me,
Well, sure.
friends and relationships, and maybe even kept healthier people away. I mean, I used to trauma dump on people. I was trying to create an instant connection with people by sharing things that I've been through because I wanted someone to share. I wanted to connect to somebody. You know what I mean? I think I did that with my ex too. Trauma dumping, trying to gain an insta friendship or insta friend. But I think some people that aren't healthy, they see that as, ooh, this person's not really confident in themselves and they don't have a lot of self-worth. And because I think when people are in a healthier place, they allow time to grow a friendship or a relationship. You get to know each other gradually, in a specific rhythm and create not just create safety, but be able to recognize if someone's trustworthy and then also building trust. That takes
Sure.
time.
Sure.
Um, so I'm just much more of a peaceful person. I have my moments.
Yeah, we all
Um,
do. We all have our moments.
but man, I don't even know how to encapsulate in words, Jason. It's
No,
wild.
that's good. It's a hard question to answer, it's not meant to be something that is just a short answer. And you
Yeah.
answered the question. You're in a completely different place now, in my opinion. Are still learning, because I think it takes people a long time. It's not just a one day lesson. We're learning
Yeah.
to love ourselves when we haven't learned how to do that before. I think a lot of people don't know how to love themselves. I mean, this is the same battle we've been fighting on TSL in the previous format. I mean, you brought up the verse, love God with everything, love your neighbors yourself. That love yourself part gets overlooked, and we've talked about it a bunch of times. And it's not absorption. It's not narcissistic love. It's just realizing that you matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
it seems so simple just to say it like I just said it, but it's way more complicated for a lot of people. So
Yeah.
in your story, you got the message early on that you didn't matter. Your feelings didn't matter. There was not a safe place for you to share your emotions. You didn't have anyone to turn to. You weren't worthy of, when being punished, for someone to come back in and have closure and say, okay, we had to punish you, but here's what you did, and here's what we would like to see in the future. So when you get those messages enough, and then you're in relationships with people that are very surfacey and what they can get from you, and then an abusive marriage where the person just seems to be out for themselves and not concerned about your own needs. So of course you got the message that you didn't matter.
Yeah.
So now,
Yeah.
in a different place with different friends, the people who see you and recognize that you're an amazing person, and to treat you kindly at first. I mean, always, but you know what I mean. When we first met, I was very interested in you, very interested, and you didn't seem like this person that had low self-esteem to me at all. I learned over time when you told me
I
about
played
the
my job well.
right, right.
That's how good I got at the facade.
It
Oh,
was.
geez.
I know you're joking in a way,
In a
but
way,
it
yeah.
wasn't just a facade. It was that some people can see who people really are, and some people
Yeah.
can't. And
Underneath the masks.
for you, it was really easy for me to see. So much so
Yeah.
that it surprised me when you did share with me how you felt in some ways
Yeah.
about
Well, I
yourself.
felt safe with you and Glenn, so that made a huge difference.
Well,
I felt
sure.
very safe with you guys. So I felt like I could let my true self out, so to
Yeah.
speak. And,
Yeah.
I'll say this one thing. I think one of the most miraculous, loving, wonderful things that we can do in this precious life that we've been given is to be ourselves, like our true self, instead of trying to be like everybody else and all that other stuff. I think that's why we go on these journeys within ourselves to figure out who that is so that we can be that in the world. And I think it just does such a service to other people.
Yeah.
When you were talking, I was trying to put my thoughts together as to me saying it. And I thought, if life is a tapestry and every one of us is a thread, can you imagine our creator or source wanting to create this specific picture? And if you have threads or AKA people that are like, I'm not good enough, I suck, my color is ugly, and they go and dye themselves, a different color, like
Yeah.
how is that? It's going to mess up the overall picture of what creation is
Oh,
when we're together
wow.
as one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
Um,
beautiful. That's
and
beautiful.
so this whole journey of learning how to love who I am, who God has made me to be, has really led into this place of me being myself. And I wanted to share this last thought because this is
Yeah.
a big one for me, at least.
Okay.
I was always, I could be myself as long as I was around someone or in an environment that I felt safe in. But what I've come to learn is how to be that safe place within myself. That safe
Oh,
place is me. So I take it everywhere I go. And it is the most amazing thing because before it was dependent on external things. And if the external things weren't there, I had to play some kind of a part, or I had to be a chameleon, or I had to erase
yeah.
myself or hide, or, all of these different
Yeah.
things. And it's such a disservice because we are all precious
Yeah.
and we're all created so individualistically and so uniquely.
Yeah.
And there's purpose behind that. So when we are trying to be like someone else or this person over there or like mom or like dad or like who someone's telling me to be, it's it's messing up the overall mural, this beautiful picture that's coming together when we come together as ourselves.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. That's
and
beautiful.
so that has been huge because talk about a roller coaster or a merry-go-round when you are constantly every day walking through different scenarios. And if you feel like you have to censor yourself or be someone you're not, or, around this person, oh, and now I'm here by someone safe, I can let down my guard. And then you're like exhausted, but you're getting rest, which is good. And then you're around other, like family, and you feel like you have to censor yourself or be someone else. It's so exhausting.
Yeah.
And then
Sure.
add on to that, I felt so responsible for other people, so
Yeah.
responsible for other people's feelings. And this past spring was when I finally dealt with that and was able to learn how to sit in the discomfort.
Yeah.
Because before, if someone else was upset, I would want to jump in. I would do it automatically. I would jump in and try to fix it and try to smooth it over and try to pat it down and try not to rock the boat. And,
Yeah.
I just felt so responsible, like, oh my gosh. And
Yep.
so learning how to sit in that discomfort of someone else being upset and knowing that I'm not responsible for them
Yep.
or their feelings, they're an adult, and
Yeah.
to learn how to be okay with that discomfort within myself. And then finally it dissipated.
Yep.
Obviously I still have a heart. I don't like when someone's upset or angry. Like I can still have compassion, but not
Sure.
overextend myself trying to fix it for them because that's also a control thing.
Oh,
I
sure.
realize that in a way that can be manipulative when you're trying to control other people so that you feel better.
Yeah.
Um,
It's good.
and, I can learn how to feel peace and equilibrium within myself, despite if someone over here is having a freak out,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
takes practice.
Yeah, it does take practice, and that's part of you were saying earlier that meeting us, that a lot of that was external, and that's true. But for someone that didn't know how to get these things for themselves, sometimes it
Yeah.
does take something external for a while to get to the point where
Yes.
it becomes
To
internal.
teach you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, people say that abusers, just as an example, because there's lots of examples, but to use that as an example, when they go off on you and they rage out, they're in a way using you as an emotional regulator. And I think someone like me did the same by me trying to control other people and to try to control the circumstances and fix it and pat it down. That was also me trying to emotionally regulate, because if everyone else outside of me is okay, I can be okay within myself.
Right.
So
Wow.
both of those aren't healthy,
No.
and I think that it's such a sad thing to think about how many generations that have gone by that people in their childhood haven't been taught how to emotionally regulate, because
Yeah.
it's so important. And it's doable. It's so doable. It just takes practice, especially when you've been doing something completely different and unhealthy your entire life up till the
Yeah.
point you're at. You're like, how do I do this? Oh my gosh, crazy.
Wonderful. I
Yeah.
love your tapestry analogy, and I think that's the perfect way to end. Do you have any closing words? Do you want to say anything to anyone else that's been through a similar thing, or are you good with where it is?
I'll just say that I hope anybody listening knows that you are loved and that
Mm,
you are special and that you're an individual, and the world is changed and different when you aren't yourself.
yeah.
Just like it's changed and different when you are, in beautiful ways. We don't even see I, the ripple effects of us being ourselves to the people around us, and then the people around them, and then the people around them. It is so far reaching. I don't think even I don't, I'm not trying to say that I get it, but just the concept, it's so mind blowing, that I just want to encourage anybody that's listening that you're here for a reason, and
Hmm.
that being yourself is one of the greatest things that you can do for the people around you,
Yeah.
because it does perpetuate, just like, wearing a mask and being fake and being like emulating, other people that aren't you. That too is also, what's the word? It catches, because we all watch people, we
Yeah.
all watch each other for social cues and stuff. So whenever I've been around someone that they were just beaming with this energy of them being wholly themselves, it's
Yeah.
catching,
Yeah.
it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Not
Contagious.
addictive.
Contagious.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. It's
Yeah.
contagious.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hate that in a way, I hate that I had to go through that, but I'm glad I did, because I am who I am today. But to think that other people too are going through it where they feel like they have to be someone that they're not, to gain love, to have a friend, to be seen, to be heard, it just breaks my heart, because you're perfect the way you are.
Yeah. That's good. That's good and so true. You to all the people out there listening, you are worth it. You're worthy. You are more than precious. And whether you believe that there's a God or universe or source or whatever your spiritual or religious beliefs, if you have any, are, you are important. There's a reason why you're here. Just like in Jen's story, it was hard for me to listen to. I mean, I've heard these things before, but still, each time I hear her talk about the way she felt about herself, I mean, oh my gosh, it's excruciating to love a person and to hear them talk about the way they felt when they were a little girl, this little precious girl with all this wonderful imagination and creativity and kindness and loveliness, to think about her in a room crying for hours by herself and nobody will go into her and just wrap her up in their arms and tell them that it's going to be okay. Well, she's not the only one that has gone through similar things. There are so
Yeah.
many people out there that have gotten these wrong messages that they're not important. They
Yeah.
don't matter.
Or broken.
Yeah. And
And we're all precious. I'm not saying that, perfect in the sense that, I'm telling everybody, you don't make mistakes. If anybody's telling you that, we're flawed human beings, but
yeah,
we're also precious and perfect.
yeah,
And The world needs you to be you.
Ooh, I like
That's
that.
my last message, really and truly.
I
The
like
world
that.
needs you to be you.
Thank you, Jen, for your transparency, and thank you for your bravery and courage to be willing to share very important things that have happened to you and where you're at now. This was a wonderful thing, and I know that someone is going to benefit from it. So thank you very much for being willing to do that.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. So if you're listening to this broadcast and you would like to share your true story live, please reach out. You can reach me by email at truestorylive.crips@gmail.com. You can also respond in the comment section on any video. I look for comments. We're starting out with a new format, so we have about 100 listens per video. And so if you hear a video, if you decide to share your story, just put it in the comments. Also, if you're friends with me on Facebook or friends with Jen, you can reach out to either one of us, and we'll set up a time for you to talk. And again, it doesn't have to be about deconstruction or religion in any way. It can be any true story. We would love to hear it. And hopefully we've done enough broadcasts to see that it's painless for the most part, and you get a chance to tell your story. And
Yeah.
I love that we're doing it this way now. I'm very proud of the work that we've done over the past several years in the format that we were doing. Those videos are still up. You can go listen to the way things used to be here at any time if you'd like to. But this is the way I wanted it to be from the beginning, is people telling their true stories live. And that's the name of the channel, and that's what we've come back to. And we've had a handful of people so far that have been willing to do that and told some great stories. And we're just at the beginning of it. And I'm excited. I'm excited for the future.
I also wanted to say real quick that it doesn't have to be your whole life story.
No.
Even if it's a section that you feel moved to share and how it affected you and the people around you or just you, like, that's cool too.
Right. Thank you, Jen. And it doesn't have to be 2 hours. If you have a short story that you'd like to tell, we're here
Absolutely.
for it. We're here for it. All right. So we will be here again next Friday. We took a little break. I put that in the description. We didn't have a guest. Jen was going to do it 2 weeks ago, but it just was a lot at the time. And then we took Thanksgiving off. And so we're back to broadcast again now. I don't know what we're going to do for Christmas. We have that coming in a couple of weeks, but we're probably going to be out of town that weekend. But we'll let people know about that. But we have schedule. We have slots open for people that want to share their story. I know this is going to pick up, and eventually I won't be able to keep track of how many people want to tell their stories. But I'm excited about getting to that point. But right now, there's plenty of space for you if you'd like to tell your story. All right. I hope everyone has a great weekend. And just remember that you matter. Take care of yourself and do what you need to do for you. And that's not selfish, for you to take care of your own needs. I wish people would learn that. You don't have to be a person that thinks only of themselves. That's not what we're saying. But you do matter. Your feelings, thoughts, emotions, and who you are as a person matters. So thank you again, Jen, and we'll see everyone next Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, God bless and take care.